Chapter 31 to 35. I'm home. I muttered, staring up at the sky, recognizing the familiar constellations and the singular moon in orbit. As beautiful as the two Skyrim moons were, I much preferred my own. Now, where exactly was I? My sword was already filling up with the required calculations, the ones I used previously were more so just to get myself to this world line. Well, I just need to make one more jump, and it's not even across realities. As my sword finished up, I slashed the air again and walked through a new portal, turning up in a familiar area, the architecture a mix of modern and Victorian. There were many people, some who gave me looks of surprise or intrigue, but I ignored it. If they were normal people there might have been an issue, but the number of bounded fields surrounding us was a clear indication that I was in the correct place. The clock tower. I didn't particularly plan on keeping a low profile. The area that composed of this branch of the Mages Association was massive. There were hundreds of buildings, thousands of acres of property and all manner of privately owned enterprises all in the surrounding area. It wouldn't be incorrect to say it was almost like a college town, but all owned by mages. At its core, the clock tower was essentially a college, albeit one where they teach magecraft and you can die if you walk down the wrong hallway. So this is it. Drake spoke. I can feel it from here. Oh, I had forgotten. The clock tower was built upon the spirit tomb of Albion, a dragon the size of a small mountain. It was obvious what he was speaking about. It must have been odd to know his rival was dead below the ground they walked. All the gods are gone, creatures retreating to another aspect of the world, and the only remnants of our legacy are our pieces being used by humans. Drake had a strange tone in his voice. I sensed no anger, only resignation. I suppose that is the way of the world. I let him quietly contemplate as I walked. I wasn't in any hurry, I may as well go for a nostalgic walk through the area. But something caught my attention, a small commotion in an open building to the north. If I had to put a word to it, I guess it would be a gymnasium. It was a bit too exquisite though. The tiles on the floor looked extraordinarily expensive, yet people were breaking them apart like they were nothing. I mean, they can be repaired easily enough through magical means, but it just seems so unnecessary. I walked past a few at the doors to get a better look. Gorilla, gorilla. Good, Miss Gorilla. A blonde woman with impressive ring curls was wearing a leotard and she stared with a rather familiar face. Damn you, bitch. Her opponent, a Japanese woman, shouted back as they traded blows. That should be Rin Tosaka. I guess I'm not far off from where I wanted to enter the timeline. I could have sworn I recognized the blonde, Luvia or something. Kind of lucky running into her here. You know, now that I think about it, I've had quite a few lucky encounters. Maybe I inherited that luck from a certain side of my family. Oi, look over to the right. I blinked, hearing Drake's words, and my eyes landed on another face I didn't think I would see here. She was also blonde, perhaps a bit short as well. She had her hair up in a bun and wore a white blouse and a blue skirt. She was quite pretty. Yeah, no wonder Drake pointed her out. She give off a familiar presence to you? I whispered to myself. Yeah, I didn't realize it until we got closer. It's to be expected, she carries your core after all. Almost as if she could hear me, she turned to look at me in confusion. Maybe she sensed Drake as well. I could theorize that her dragon's core was having some kind of reaction to the owner in my soul, even if they were technically different dragons. Well, now I'm a bit curious, so I walked over. May I sit here? I asked, very politely. She was royalty and I did have manners. There were bleachers set up, seemingly out of place when this building looked so extravagant, but I didn't dwell on it. What caught my attention was how almost everyone was avoiding her. She was sitting quietly in the corner here and the few dozen people were no less than probably 20 feet away. I do not own these seats, she replied curtly. I sat down, not too close, but enough to make it obvious that I was in her presence. We sat in silence for a moment or two, watching the fight, but I could see her glance at me a couple times. It's a shame that Miss Tosaka is going to lose, I said idly. My new companion froze, but she didn't look upset. I could guess that she realized the outcome of this little spat as well. How can you tell? She asked, not as an accusation against me, but more in a curious way. Her martial arts aren't bad, but Jiquan if I'm not mistaken. I nodded to myself, reaffirming some of the vague memories I had in my head. She was prominent. How many versions of my previous self had a Tosaka as their student? Maybe I would even call her good, but it's unfortunate that her opponent had mastered reinforcement to a higher degree. Magecraft isn't always the definitive indicator in combat. She furrowed her brow slightly, before getting her expression neutral. That is true, especially in this case. If all was equal, I would say that Miss Tosaka would win 9 out of 10 times. Her style of martial arts is a good counter to her opponent who focuses on grabs, throws, and locks in wide movements. While Miss Tosaka seems to favor such large attacks herself, she also was keen enough to mix in some subtle jabs, and smaller movements to grab the momentum. My composed companion smiled ever so slightly. If it's as you say, then shouldn't Tosaka win this bout? It comes back down to reinforcement. Her opponent is on a higher level of mastery with that little spell, meaning her reaction speed is slightly higher, her body is sturdier, and her attacks hit just a little bit harder. I shared her small smile. You should know better than most how much that little advantage can mean in a fight. She pursed her lips. I think she was mulling over what I meant by that. I doubt with her nature, she would have revealed her true identity, especially in this place. It is as you say, I do not believe Tosaka can win this fight. She sighed. What are they even fighting about? I asked. I believe Miss Edelfelt is still unhappy that Tosaka had become the wizard martial student when she had not. Ah, that's her name. Luvia Gelita Edelfelt, member of the Edelfelt family. That means she's been here for a bit at least, she's probably around my age. Ah, some scheme to maybe draw the wizard marshal's attention? Or is Miss Edelfelt just venting her frustration? Mayhaps it is both. Her lips quirked upward slightly. I do not partake in the politics that happen here, so I would not be able to comment on it anymore. Not partaking in the politics, yet you are so easily able to navigate them. Years of practice don't just disappear, it seems. Of course, I can only guess that the last thing you would want to do as a servant would be to delve back into politics again. I smirked, eyeing her reaction. It was small, but I could tell she was surprised at what I said. Not many magi here are able to identify me as a servant on the first meeting. She said evenly. Or maybe you sought me out specifically. Her attention was more focused than before. Oh, it seems she maybe has a sort of reputation here. Perhaps that is why people were avoiding her. I guess if Rin was my grandfather's student, she would garner enough attention that having a servant around her would become something of common knowledge. It was by chance. I waved off her questioning. I was on the way to see my grandfather and I just so happened to catch this little spat going on. When I saw Miss Tosaka participating, I thought it suitable to watch. And what is your intention with Rin? She gazed sharpened considerably and her words like a sword at my neck. I wouldn't be surprised if she had to dissuade quite a few people here in the past. As far as a magus goes, Rin's talent was indeed monstrous. Add on her lack of family backing and being Zelretch's student, she's probably been hounded by all types in this place. I was curious about the student my grandfather took in. I said simply, a smile creeping on my face as realization dawned on her. Ah, I believe I forgot to introduce myself, how rude of me. I of course followed proper etiquette for someone of her status. Wilhelm Henry Schweinorg, it is a pleasure to meet you, Miss Pendragon. How? The servant's eyes flashed in surprise. You're a smart girl, figure it out. I winked, leaving her dumbfounded. And don't worry, I made sure no one was eavesdropping. A rune appeared at the tip of my index finger. It seemed pretty obvious that her true name be kept a secret. She visibly calmed down, she wasn't one to show all her emotions on her sleeve. You are the Wizard Marshal's grandson, or so you claim. I could only suspect that you have access to his magic as well, perhaps knowledge from a parallel world? Well done. I gave her a small clap, withdrawing an item from my ring. Here's your prize. I presented her with a flower, one I was a bit familiar with after learning it was Meridia's favorite. She hesitantly took it, staring at the flower oddly. This is not a normal flower. Artoria was indeed perceptive. It's called dragon's tongue, it grows in places with a lot of heat. It got its name because of its likelihood to bloom in dragons' nests for obvious reasons. There is also the added benefit of being soothing for dragons when they sleep. I was kind of curious to see if it would have the same effect on her as it did on me. Technically a magic flower, but it didn't have any impressive overt effects, mainly used as alchemy ingredients. She actually seemed to like it. I had just assumed to see her merely acknowledge the gift and nothing more, but she looked genuinely interested. I wonder if having Dragon my made her more inclined to have a good impression of me. I was a little surprised when she schooled her expression, pushing back towards me. I thank you for your generous gift, but I will have to decline, if you... Her words sounded extremely rehearsed, and I realized what was going on. Stop. I held my hand up interrupting, realizing what was going on. This is a small gift without any thought of recourse or attempt at garnering some kind of debt. While the mages here weren't exactly on par with the Fey folk, it was a good idea to follow the same principles when dealing with unknowns. I'm sure Artoria memorized the lines regarding accepting gifts and she resorted right to those. Rin is my grandfather's student, practically family, consider this a hand extended in friendship. It was just a small thing, not even a romantic gesture, not that I didn't find her attractive, but such things aren't meant for a first meeting. No, it was genuinely supposed to be just a way to perhaps bridge the gap and maybe become something close to friendly since we would probably be around each other more often. I wasn't lying about the effects of dragon's tongue either, it was soothing for the dragon species to sleep around. With Artoria's nature, having the magical core of this world's drake, it would probably be just as effective. I'm sure she could even feel its effects right now. Hell, I could feel the subtle soothing feeling from it, and I wanted to make a good impression. Not like it was something nefarious either, and it was quite pretty if I did say so myself. I see. She still looked a bit unsure. I could only sigh. I couldn't really blame her, this place was a nest of vipers. Most here were willing to do anything to get ahead. Saber. A familiar voice called out, walking towards us. Both me and Artoria turned to look at Rin, who had already changed back into her normal clothes and walked over. It seems we were a bit distracted. She was sporting a few bruises around her face, but nothing too bad. Who are you? Her eyes narrowed as she stood in front of me. Her tone was, even, not too disrespectful but definitely suspicious. Wilhelm Henry Schweinorg, I am your teacher's grandson. I stood up and introduced myself proper. There was no need to be pompous or difficult, I wasn't lying with my comment about us practically being family. I have it on good authority that Zelretch considers her a granddaughter. She just blinked, looking between me and Artoria, who gave a small nod. He never told me he had a grandson, I didn't think he had any relatives. She looked at me intently, as if trying to grasp any deceit. Ah, trying to accuse me of being a liar without insulting me, she's learned well so far. I'm sure there are many things he hasn't told you yet, he has lived a long life after all. She looked skeptical, but it was also one of those circumstances where she couldn't really call me out on it. Reen, another voice shouted, walking over. Luvia strode over, flanked by several guards, who looked like they belonged to her family. They all had some ridiculous hairstyles, and basically walking with that aristocrat stride, like they knew they were important and everyone should know it too. What do you want? Rin all but growled. Don't be like that, Reen. Luvia laughed haughtily. It was just a friendly spar, I'm sure you'll do better next time. She covered her mouth and continued to laugh in that obnoxious way. Was she pronouncing Rin's name like that on purpose? Rin audibly twitched and I wanted to sit down and watch the fun, but Artoria put a hand on Rin's shoulder to visibly calm her down. Whatever, I need to get back to work. She flipped her hair up, dismissing the insult. Luvia didn't look happy, probably wanted to go to reaction out of Rin. Her eyes turned to me as her lips curled up. Reen, who's your new friend? He's Wilhelm, first-generation magus. I answered, earning a look from Rin. We exchanged a glance before I answered again. Me and Rin just so happened to share a circle for magical research and would be seeing much more of each other in the future, so I wanted to introduce myself. C looked at me strangely, perhaps because of my first-generation magus remark. Luvia's eyes practically sparkled. Oh ho ho, Rin, I thought you had standards, but I suppose that is another aspect you are lacking in. Luvia gave the very definition of a haughty laugh. Oh yes, here comes the hazing. If it wasn't the subtle racism directed to those with Asian descent, everyone loved to look down on the new blood. Technically, I was a first-generation magus, but on the other hand, my bloodline could be traced back to before humanity. On my father's side, of course, hell, I'm technically related to Big G himself. Rin narrowed her eyes slightly, staring for a moment before she smiled brightly, holding back a laugh. It's actually my first time coming to the clock tower, I said, enthusiastically. My acting skills were top-notch, and now that I'm back in my home, I should really check out the local theater scene, it would be a good break from what I've been doing recently. I see, and what, may I ask, is your magecraft focus? Luvia could barely hold back the glee in her voice as she kept glancing at Rin. It wasn't exactly a secret what one specializes in, though digging any more than that could be seen as rude or even downright malicious. Well, if she wanted to keep making her hole deeper, who was I to stop her? Well, I quite enjoy runecraft. I smiled brightly. Ho ho ho. She covered her mouth, laughing some more. Runecraft is it? What an old craft to pursue. Yeah, the older families here look down on runecraft due to its inability to perceivably reach the root. The Akashic Records, commonly referred to as the root, is the origin of all existence, containing all knowledge past, present and future. It is the focus of every true magus and the purpose of their research. I just nodded along, completely ignorant of her subtle jabs. Indeed, runes are a craft that dates back to the age of gods. They are a truly powerful avenue of research. Yes, of course. She continued to snicker, stealing glances at Rin, who just scowled and crossed her arms. Though I saw a small glint in Artoria's eye, I think she noticed what I was doing and didn't make a move to stop me. I guess even she was a bit put off by this girl's attitude, yet she had too much pride to step past her own position to do something. It's always nice to meet someone who appreciates my craft. I smiled happily, trying to mimic Thorum's own smile. I'm really impressed with the facilities here. They even allow for such vigorous sparring between colleagues. Luvia's eyes seemed to brighten. You're right, they do allow for sparring between colleagues. Since you're new to the clock tower, why don't you introduce yourself with a spar? Alistair here does so love a friendly bout. She tapped the large gentleman standing next to her on the arm. He was a little bit bigger than most Nords, practically all muscle. It was impressive, really. Well, it's my first day here, I don't know. You are Reen's friend, I'm sure you know your way around a fight. She snickered. There was a crowd gathering around us at this point, a bunch of whispers directed at me and some not-so-subtle laughs echoing Luvia's. Well, it looks like she took the bait. Okay, you convinced me. Let's have a friendly fight. I held out my hand and smiled towards Alistair. He stared down at me, not saying a word. It was rather intense. I don't think he's allowed to speak unless Luvia gives him permission. Such is the way some of these families raise their extra members. Alistair, dear, why don't you repair the arena while I give our new friend a rundown of the rules? Luvia said ever so kindly. Do whatever you want. Rin snorted. Reen, don't be like that. How about we make a friendly wager? I have a few recently cut gems. She took a couple of shiny gems out of her sleeve, practically waving them around. They appear to have not been used yet, meaning that her family's magic hasn't touched them, so they were safe for outsiders to acquire. Unless of course, you don't have any more yourself. But how could that be? I'm sure someone of your stature has many resources available. I could tell Rin was about to lose her temper. She did a good job of keeping a straight face so far. Actually, I forgot to give a present for our first meeting, how rude of me. I withdrew a bag from my ring and presented it to Rin. To be honest, I did want to give her a gift for our first meeting since she was grandfather's student. I just didn't plan on doing it so openly. Rin hesitantly opened the bag. I could tell she cast her own diagnostic spell on the fabric before opening. Good girl, make sure no one tries to pull a fast one on you. This, she exclaimed, looking down in shock. Artoria even peeked over and her eyes widened ever so slightly. I heard you specialize in jewel craft. I believe these may help you in your research. Rin lifted a handful of jewels out of the bag. I think she completely forgot where she was as even Luvia looked completely shocked, staring at the bag, then at me, and even down at my ring. I guess she noticed where I took the bag from. Too late, you dug your hole, time to get buried. I don't hate Luvia, merely more of a dislike, which is why I wasn't plotting her death or anything like that. I would settle for a small bit of humiliation. I knew she wasn't a bad person, but she also wasn't the picture of innocence either. Why don't we increase our wager a little bit? Rin's lips formed a malicious smirk. Of course, I would completely understand if you couldn't match up to my wealth. She flipped her hair haughtily, mimicking Luvia's mannerisms. Luvia practically snarled in frustration. I don't keep that many gems on me like some kind of peasant trying to show off their wealth. She scoffed. I can match any wager you put forth. Rin very reluctantly handed the bag over to Saber. Saber, you keep hold of this until the fight is over. Of course, I shall make sure all dues are paid out. She nodded. It is good to know at least one of you is up to a certain standard. Luvia turned her nose up, handing over the few gems she currently had. Miss Saber, why don't you become my servant? You're wasted on such a gorilla like Reen. I told you before. She's my servant. Rin practically shouted in annoyance. Ho ho ho, you see this Saber, your master is such a barbarian, not that I could expect much else from an Asian. You wanna go blondie? I wouldn't mind a second fight today, the first one left me unfulfilled. Rah! Gorilla, keeping roaring, Miss Gorilla. Rin. No. Stay out of it, Saber, this bitch has it coming. Ahem. I cleared my throat, earning their attention and a small nod of thanks from Saber. Of course, only someone uncouth would interrupt a fight that is already predetermined. Luvia waved her hand flippantly towards Rin. Just get your gems ready, bitch. Rin snorted. How uncivilized. Luvia scoffed. Now, I believe it is time to explain the rules of this battle. She turned to look at me. The rules are simple, no killing. She clapped her hands happily. And that is it. Yeah, they don't really babysit people here, but they also don't like to do the dirty deeds out in public like this. They at least want their students to not kill each other so openly. I believe my opponent is ready for me. I saw Alistair waiting patiently at one end of the arena, the entire thing looking brand new as all the tiles were now fixed and in place and there wasn't a speck of dust to be seen. Well, time to establish the pecking order. There was actually more to the fight than just don't kill your opponent. No doubt Luvia was trying to be dramatic. Really, it was just basic etiquette things, like don't purposely blow up the building, don't hurt spectators, blah blah, common sense things. This will be an open match, any spells are acceptable as long as the rules are followed. Luvia stated, facing the crowd, hyping it up. She was really trying to embarrass Rin here, honestly this just went past amusing and fell flatly on annoying. I'm sure in her mind, this Alistair would defeat me, then she would gloat and blow it up saying how Rin's friend was so easily defeated. Basically, just twisting in the knife after she won their earlier spar. Honestly, this is pretty tame. 4 plots go in this place. Can we just get on with this? I need to get back to my workshop. Rin replied with detachment, much to Luvia's annoyance. I smiled slightly, realizing that Rin also knew exactly what buttons to push on Luvia. Let's see how long you can stay so relaxed. Luvia frowned, turning back to the arena. Let me introduce our fighters. On the left we have Alistair Edelfelt, third son of the second branch family. Even with being the third child of the second branch family with no crest of his own, he was able to pioneer a new path for his own thaumaturgy only using the basics of our family's specialty. Oh! His own path, maybe that's why he was elevated to the position of Luvia's bodyguard? She's the most talented of her family, or did she have a sister? I vaguely recall that she was someone extremely important to their family line, basically one of or the next in line to lead. That's probably why she had several bodyguards following her around. A branch family member, and not even the first child, no doubt he received very few resources and had to rely purely on his own skills and talent. My interest was piqued now. A new path, I'm curious what he's used their jewel craft as a foundation to achieve. The barest of basics was known about jewel craft across the magical community, the non-science would probably have a little bit more than that to work with. And how about a welcome to a new member of our prestigious institute, coming from the east, a first-generation magus and a runecraft practitioner, Wilhelm. She exclaimed, intentionally iterating my background. Well, wasn't that the unholy fucking trifecta of nonsense that the people here look down on? I could hear the laughs and jeers directed toward me and feigned ignorance, but I definitely remembered faces. I looked around and caught Artoria's eyes. I raised an eyebrow as she looked back at me. Only receiving a small nod, but I could pretty much understand her message. It seems like I have her blessing and I do want to leave a good impression. Bounded fields sprang up around us, a defense mechanism that allowed the fighting to not carry over to any bystander. Not something absolute, but it was the bare necessary for a type of facility like this. Well, the facilities here were something to admire, while not all that impressive on the surface, the ease of use and application was noteworthy. Begin! Luvia shouted as all the mechanisms fell into place. Well, bonus points to my opponent, he didn't act cocky and immediately acted, reinforcement covered his body and I mimicked the action, but instead of charging right at me, he dashed to the side and threw a handful of gems into the center of the area. No, that wasn't quite right, they weren't quite gemstones, they were pieces, like a few were shattered into dozens of smaller ones, topazes if my eyes didn't fail me. They sunk into the ground as their mysteries actualized, ignoring the tiles and other barriers to their target. It only took a moment for something to rise up. Golems, now that's a surprise. I said honestly. And they even looked above average, curious. I know it takes a bit of effort to make golems of this quality, and you did so instantly. Alistair came from my side, every step he took practically dug into the ground as he charged with an overhead fist. I ducked, knocking his fist away and used his own momentum to throw him towards the wall. Surprisingly, he was able to fold into my own attack and reorganized his fall to catch himself from suffering any damage. I suppose it has been a while since I've fought someone in hand-to-hand that could move at these kinds of speeds, perhaps I'm rusty. I felt a small smile form on my face as he moved back in, ducking close to the ground and trying to sweep my legs by swinging both arms. With a stomp on the ground, I cast an earth wall right in front of me as his arms smashed it to pieces. With a wave of my hand, several runes appeared, floating in air in front of me. As the wall crumbled, they actualized, forming into flames and firing off like bullets towards my opponent, who nimbly dodged each one. Once again, I'm impressed. He shouldn't be any more than 1 or 2 years ahead of me, yet he has a good amount of experience and spellcraft under his belt. This time he chose to duck behind the pillars holding the ceiling up. Hats off to my opponent, his golems didn't allow me breathing room as they also moved to surround and attack. He also didn't re-engage, opting to allow his disposable minions to wear me down and gauge my reaction. Say what you will about the Edelfelt, but they sure train theirs well. Harass, immobilize, swarm. I could tell his strategy, and it was both well made and a solid plan. Curious thing you are, I said idly as a massive stone fist swept down at me. These things lumbered 1 or 2 heads over me, but they were a bit impressive on their feet. Their coordination wasn't bad either. Were they perhaps mental commands from their caster or pre-programmed already? They weren't stumbling over one another as they all closed in on me. Well, this would be uncomfortable if I allowed this to happen. I allowed runes to swirl around my hand, forming into a dozen runic circles covering every side. Lightning, I lazily called out as the large bolts discharged towards the closest ones, demolishing them with a frightening ease. There were shouts of astonishment from the peanut gallery. I held back a smirk as I noticed Livia's surprise. Now aren't you a gift that keeps on giving? I couldn't help but grin as I saw the bodies reform without any inherent damage to the golems. I love to see new spells, especially ones like this that were very ingenious in their applications, but I think all good things must come to an end. I believe I understand now, I stated, weaving through the mass of stone limbs swung at me. Distort, a simple illusion spell I learned from Skyrim. The numbers of me in the arena now number in the 20s as I confused the animated earth constructs. This spell was quickly turning into one of my favorites. Topazes, I said decently loud, making sure to gather attention on me. Jewelcraft and the Kabbalah. You use the connection topazes have to Yesid of the Sephiroth, a common enough application but quite intelligent. Specifically, you pull on the Tree of Life to grant the golems life, at the obvious cost of the magical energy supplied via the topazes. This also has the added benefit of not allowing them to die, while the topazes still supply them with magical energy, but at the same time they are time-limited, but in a trade-off their abilities are almost supercharged for the duration. This concept is mostly used in healing, but you are using it to sustain life via magical battery, and thus they are essentially immortal until either the gem is removed or the magical energy runs out. My praise wasn't unwarranted. This guy was truly talented. Well, since he showed me something so nice, I won't be too harsh. I think a week or so bedridden is enough of a punishment. I materialized the runes around me, moving my hands fast enough to string the sentences together. I intentionally chose something rather showy. I made a few calculations and first summoned a large runic circle under my feet to help facilitate casting and control the output to a more precise degree. Freezing winds of Jotunheim. I let my voice carry all across the arena. The cold air exploded out from me, instantly freezing everything in the vicinity. It even crashed against the bounded fields in the area, cascading and threatening to break free from the confines. I made sure to reel back all the excess, but this was a spell that didn't want to be caged. The golems froze solid, unable to move, and I assume I burned through their magical energy supply as they didn't even fight it after a bit. The cold continued and the bounded field began to crack as the winds swept across the entire building. I reined it in as they rushed out, but I only allowed everyone here to get a little cold, forcing the spell to dissipate a few moments later. The place was freezing and there was a deathly quiet in the air now. Every step I took on the newfound frost practically echoed throughout the arena as I approached the lump of ice that was my opponent. A small tap and it shattered, Alistair falling to the ground on his back, his breathing a little haggard, but he still tried to jump up. I merely slammed my foot on his stomach, causing him to slightly cough blood. You lost. I narrowed my eyes down at him, daring him to say otherwise. He just responded with a meek nod. I let off him, taking a step back and sweeping my gaze across the crowd. I met the eyes of anyone who dared to look back. By all means, insult me based on my craft or heritage, I welcome it. But it seemed like no one was keen on speaking. Well, Alistair should be fine if you want to go retrieve him. I walked over to Livia with a smirk on my face. I didn't want the guy to die, he hasn't even said a word to me, merely following the directions of his family head, or whatever. And he was quite talented, it would be a shame if he died like this. How? Livia looked utterly dumbfounded. How unthoughtful I seemed to have forgotten to full introduce myself again. I gave an exaggerated bow. Wilhelm Henry Schweinorg. Gods, I loved saying that. Schweinorg? She stuttered as her face paled. And there it is. The peanut gallery also was having a conniption. I think I saw a few that were throwing around insults previously bolt out of the area. Good luck with that, I can be a right petty bastard sometimes, pray you don't meet me again. How was that? Pretty good, right? I looked towards Rin and Artoria. The latter of whom just nodded like she expected it. Yeah, she probably saw through me already, but Rin seemed a bit surprised at my power. But I think she just pushed all that away as an evil smile grew on her face and she turned towards Livia. Her face. It was priceless. Rin laughed heartily as we walked down the halls. And then you were like, excuse me, I wouldn't want my Asian barbarianism to contaminate you any longer, when she tried to apologize after hearing your name. Yeah, she was getting on my nerves. I just nodded, I wasn't going to hold Rin's hand all the time and try to meddle with her issues, but some lines needed to be drawn. She should keep her head down for a while now, at least I won't have to hear that bitch's laugh until her family is done punishing her. Rin happily jiggled the bag full of jewels. And she has to pay me even more gems. I wish I could see the look on her face when she has to go to her family and beg. Well, I'm glad you like my present. I just smiled, recalling a few memories of this girl from my last life. It was amusing how she never even considered declining the gift I gave her. Are you really Zelretch's grandson? You said you were a first generation. She looked at me as we turned a corner. We have no blood connection, if that's what you're wondering. I said honestly. But yes, we are related, and the best way I chose to address it was being his grandson. It makes it simpler for all involved. She just signed. You have that same, I know more than you, look that the old man does. Really? I need to check that out in the mirror and learn how to do it intentionally. I wonder if he's home. I said quietly as we approached his room. It was more like an underground mansion. The place was hard to describe, a lot of the infrastructure was actually underground as it got closer to the tomb with the better atmosphere for experiments. Let's see if I remember how to do this. I began tapping the door in various places. There was no handle, it was magically locked in a very intricate way, but it seemed like it was the same as I recalled. There we are. I said as the doors disengaged and all the traps and defense turned off. I guess you really do know him then. Rin finally acknowledged, I don't think anyone would be brave enough or stupid enough to actually try to break into here. You'd be surprised. I said with a small chuckle. He didn't get that mask of a prankster without good reason. In fact, it all started with some idiot breaking into my workshop and stealing an old prototype for his jeweled sword. You throw one guy into a dimension filled with some very affectionate tentacle monsters and suddenly you're a prankster. Wonderful, he isn't here yet. Why is that wonderful? Rin looked at me in confusion and Artoria followed us inside. She seemed relaxed enough, I guess they've both been here long enough to not tiptoe around everything. But she also seemed rather relaxed in my presence, not nearly as on guard as I would have imagined. This was technically Zelretch's workshop, but really only one room was dedicated to that, another was for Rin's own workshop and various other living spaces. Hell, there was a room that was specifically Zelretch's office, the target of my attention. Because I can now raid his liquor cabinets. Will you now? A voice grabbed all our attention, and I felt a chill run up my spine as my eyes widened. The family face that I saw 1,000 times when I peered into the mirror of my memories, the same eyes, the same look. I didn't even fucking sense him, I didn't feel any speck of his presence as he used the kaleidoscope to appear here. Master. Rin said respectfully. Rin, I hear you got into a fight today. He smiled ever so gently, but dear God did it give me anxiety for some reason. It was like an invisible pressure weighing down on me. He's strong, Drake spoke up. Your memories don't really do it justice. Yeah, I was really a monster in my previous life. It was nothing, just a stupid spar. Rin huffed in annoyance and Zelretch just chuckled, turning towards Artoria. What a beautiful flower. He flipped his hand, revealing an elegant vase with some water already inside it. It would make a lovely decoration. Thank you, Wizard Marshal. Artoria said respectfully. And my grandson. His eyes bore down on me. I felt so insignificant for the briefest of moments before he pulled back. I was moments away from doing something to diminish the pressure myself. I see. He stroked his chin. I assume we have quite a bit to discuss. We sat in his office. The familiar walls and furniture were playing heavily on my nostalgia. Rin and Artoria sat next to me, all three of us facing Zelretch, who sat behind his desk as he casually browsed a few documents, seemingly content with the silence in the room. Which one is it? Zelretch spoke softly, barely even glancing up, but I felt the question directed towards me. Pardon? I asked in confusion. Which of my collection were you so keen on helping yourself to? Ah, I see. The 300-year-old whiskey. There wasn't really a point in hiding it. That is a good choice. He nodded. I'm curious, how does it rate? Easily a 9 out of 10, one of my favorites. Zelretch slowly got up from his seat and walked over to the cabinet holding his various alcohol. I was saving this for a special occasion, and I believe this qualifies. There was no rush to his movements as he carefully looked over the selected bottle. He took 4 identical glasses and set them up each in front of us. How would you suggest taking it? He inspected the bottle and the liquid within. It's not bad clean, but I prefer it with a couple drops of water. I thought for a moment before mentally checking my ring. I have some glacial water, never touched by pollution or human hands. I offered, taking out a bottle I filled back in Skyrim. It was just a whim back then. I had some free time, and such pure water was a bit hard to come by without decent effort to produce. Wonderful. He took the container and admired it for a moment before pouring everyone a smidge into their glasses. It's an acquired taste, don't force yourself if you don't like it. I said lazily towards Rin and Artoria. I admit, I have not tried any alcohol from this time period besides some of the more readily available stock. Artoria lightly picked up her glass, giving it a curiously sniff. She probably only had anything cheap so far, probably sake considering where she was summoned to, and Rin didn't strike me as someone who would be a connoisseur of the harder varieties of liquor. This is supposed to be 300 years old. Rin looked at her glass. There doesn't exist a whiskey over 200 years old. I said with a small smile. At least, one known to the public. From a parallel world line then? Rin hazarded a guess. Actually, it's native here. Zelretch corrected, taking a sip, leaning back and appreciating the taste. Your recommendation was spot on. His eyes glanced to me but for a moment. Then how is it 300 years old? Her eyebrows furrowed, hesitantly taking her own sip. I saw her struggle to keep it down and I didn't want to laugh. I wouldn't make fun of her for that, some people simply don't like the taste. When Miss Aozaki joined the clock tower, I approached her for a joint experiment. I had some thoughts that needed confirming and the application of her own magic would be invaluable. Zelretch quietly explained. You may know her better as the Blue, but being as one of the few prominent figures of Asian descent, I don't doubt you've heard her name a few times. The Blue, the fifth true magic, the name for the other magician just as Zelretch is called the Kaleidoscope. Truthfully, I don't know much about the Blue, but I do know that time travel lies in its domain. What, so you sent some alcohol back in time? She muttered, looking a bit put off by the taste. Zelretch let out a small chuckle. Indeed, though the objects we sent back were irrelevant, but that didn't mean we couldn't benefit from the procedure as well. I believe Miss Aozaki also still has her own bottle she hasn't opened yet. I will need to make a note and give her my recommendation. Wait, if this was the first time you opened it, how did he know what it tastes like? Rin pointed her figure towards me. Oh, she picked up on that. I thought for sure she wouldn't notice. I praised with a smile. Zelretch also smiled. I had chosen her as my student for a reason. Time travel? Artoria asked, tilting her head. A good guess, and while technically correct, is wrong. I replied. I'm not native to this world line and I was born about a decade from now, year-wise. I have some investment knowledge if you're interested. I said with a laugh. That may come in handy. Zelretch shared my amusement. I noticed your runecraft application, I'm surprised you chose that path. It was something I could immediately achieve something of note with, and my resources at the time were lacking. I frowned, thinking back to the world I was born in. I felt a bit of regret that I had so quickly abandoned it. Though I do not regret my decision, I have found myself content with the craft so far. The runic arts are a very practical path to choose, I don't blame you for that decision. Zelretch acknowledged, not looking at all put off by my choice. I've never seen someone utilize runes like that before. Rin furrowed her eyebrows. Mostly just for single enhancements or small spells. Most rune users don't have nearly infinite magical energy like we do. I pointed out. A single rune is akin to a spell that requires a couple words to actualize. I had put forth dozens to hundreds of runes into a single spell. Others can achieve this, but most can't throw them around like I can when I can just refill my reserve so quickly. Rin let out a long-winded sigh. I still haven't gotten that far in my studies. She was talking about the infinite magical energy, I was assuming. Technically it's not infinite magical energy in the way that the heavens feel is used. It could be said that once you master the Kaleidoscope to a certain degree your mana regeneration is basically yes. Really, it's only limited by our own physical ability to handle. It was the reason magic circuits lost a lot of their relevance. Most mages had to be conscious of their spell usage, but a master of the Kaleidoscope can throw around spells all day until their body finally collapses under the strain. I finished off my glass and Zelretch was kind enough to pour me another glass as I finished my first. I noticed Rin pushing hers away whereas Artoria didn't seem to prefer the taste either. Here. I said, offering 2 bottles of mead I withdrew from my ring. How do you keep doing that? Rin asked, inspecting the bottle. Taking stuff from nowhere? I smirked. I'm sure your teacher can do something similar. I've been working on the Kaleidoscope for months now and I still have no idea. He won't tell me anything, except to figure it out myself. Rin huffed. This is good. She took a second sip. Mead from the world I came from, found nowhere on Earth. It reminds me of the drinks from my time. Artoria spoke softly, also enjoying the beverage. I'm glad they like them, this is a joyous occasion so it should be celebrated with drinks at least. I felt a little bit of pity for Rin, she's still in that learning stage. There needs a bit of self-discovery before he could actually start pointing her in specific directions, otherwise her own potential could be stymied. To answer your question, it's my ring. I wiggled my finger. It is an impressive piece of work, the space is folded seamlessly, if a bit amateurishly as well. Zelretch praised. It was the archmage at a college I joined in another world. It was apparently his first attempt at such a thing. Impressive for a novice then. Well, he was a rather impressive mage, all things considered. I have no idea what you're talking about. Rin frowned in annoyance. A folded special dimension attached to my ring. Essentially I have a pocket space I can access that stores stuff. I said simply. I even have this too. I took out my hat to show off. May I? Zelretch asked as I gave a nod and handed it over. He inspected the workmanship and even stuck his hand inside the space. What an amusing piece of work. If the ring was amateurish, this is childish at best, yet someone managed to finagle it together into something that works. He handed it back to me. Thank you, for the drink. I finally said, it wasn't good to hold back on etiquette even if it was towards myself. How could I hold back with such a sincere gift towards my student? He smiled lightly, conveying his gratitude. Oh, that reminds me, I was going to give something else. I forgot about the other stuff. I didn't really want to hand this over in public, let's see. I shifted through a few things, taking a couple books out, inspecting them and setting them on the table. Jewelcraft is a good path, but it also lacks in some areas. Let's see, Lesser Ward would be good for a shield that doesn't need to waste gems on. A basic healing spell is good for every mage's repertoire. I set down a spell tome on healing as well. Ah, Oak Flesh, a body strengthening spell that works on a different paradigm than reinforcement, so they can be used in tandem. I set that on the desk as well. I actually have a couple versions superior to Oak Flesh, but it was a good starting point. Detect Life, good for dangerous situations. Another good spell I grabbed on my way out. Rin looked at me like I had two heads, Zelretch just blinked, taking a book and cracking it open, reading a few words. Interesting, I don't recognize the origin. He looked genuinely happy. I could understand, finding new and interesting things was always a happy occasion at that point in my life. I may have fudged my first application of dimensional travel and ended up on a world line outside of Gaia. I sheepishly rubbed the back of my head. He closed the book, giving me a deadpanned look. You're lucky you didn't die. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to travel to a world not parallel to our own? What am I saying? Of course you know. Actually, I think there may be some holes in my memories. I don't have any knowledge of going outside of Earth. With some self-reflection, I realized there were quite a few holes in my memories. Zelretch tilted his head, seemingly shifting through several thoughts before thinking about something intently. I see, I suppose that might be expected considering your unique circumstances. Well, it was already pretty clear he had an idea of what was going on. It was to be expected of myself. I guess it's time to have this conversation. I sighed, bracing myself. It was going to come eventually. It was odd to see him, me, from this side. The presence he gave off was surprisingly gentle. Here you go, Rin, take good care of these and put them in my library when you finish. Thanks. She was still out of it. It's nothing. I waved her off. I had copies anyways, and they are just the basics. I looked over to my previous self. So, how much do you know? I can make several educated guesses. I wouldn't be remiss to hear it all from the beginning. Yeah, that's what I was assuming at this point. Rin and Artoria looked at me intently. I guess they were lost and were curious as well. I guess it started about a month ago when I awoke memories from my previous life and realized I was reincarnated. Reincarnation. Rin and Artoria shared the same remark, astonishment clear on their faces. Yeah, it was a bit wild for me when I realized what was happening. A lifetime's worth of memories flooding into the mind of a normal 18-year-old kid. I was a bit of a mess those first few days. I just ran a hand through my hair, thinking back to it. How did your memories awaken? Zelretch asked. Do you not know, didn't you set this up? My eyebrows scrunched up in confusion. I had no memories of this myself, but I attributed it to the holes, but this was in no way by chance. Something like this could not be anything but artificial intervention. To be honest, I haven't done more than just write down some thoughts on what you went through. I haven't even developed a proper hypothesis yet for testing, he admitted without any fanfare. That is, not what I wanted to hear. Is it possible that a future him, or rather, me, did this? While I doubt he would have had events play out like they did, I had assumed he had a more direct hand in my existence. I think we're both missing context then. I guess we'll figure this out together. I sighed. Getting answers to my questions wouldn't be as easy as I thought. It started when an exorcist attacked me after I accidentally walked up on him. An exorcist? Why would an exorcist attack you if you were just a normal person then? Rin blurted out. Oh, did I forget to mention that? My mother is human, my father is not. I shared a look with Zelretch. Apparently, he didn't know what I was either if I was reading his expression correctly. A phantasmal species in the modern era? Artoria looked a bit surprised, but I didn't see any judgmental looks. Interesting. Well, the world I came from, the Age of Gods never ended, even if the world was pretty similar to this one. It wasn't that simple, but it was enough to describe the situation. Curious. Zelretch scratched his chin in thought. How? The Age of Gods, doesn't that mean magic and miracles should be more open and widespread? Should thaumaturgy even exist there, since humanity would be closer to the root, but then how would it be modernized to something resembling this world if that was the case? Were there new layers of reality that overrode pre-existing worldviews into something that allowed for coherence? Did the phantasmal species develop alongside humanity? Would the collective unconscious still favor us? Rin blurted out. That would explain your non-human blood. Are you an Oni then? A yokai of some sort? Kind of close, but you are thinking incorrectly. Wow, she really was wrapping her head around this. Those were some good questions. It's sad that the answer is kind of lackluster. Are you a demigod? Artoria asked. Divinity. Rin practically exclaimed, reiterating the question. Are you a demigod? Wrong direction. I snorted, holding back a small laugh. What do you mean, wrong direction? Rin questioned. You are thinking me something divine, and you are thinking in the wrong direction. Are you part demon then? Artoria said plainly. I admired her ability to hold her emotions in check. I don't think most people would look so natural accusing someone of being a demon and actually believing it. Well, not really. I wasn't, but the difference was mostly academic. I watched Artoria furrow her brow, trying to think through it. Rin wasn't faring any better. I waited until she started taking a drink to answer. My biological father is Satan, I'm a half-devil. PPPPFFFFFTTTT, a large amount of liquid squirted across the table, landing on Zelretch's face. There was a pregnant silence. Zelretch just blinked as liquid dropped down his face. Artoria looked utterly dumbfounded as she looked at me, and even Zelretch seemed a bit taken back. I just smiled innocently. It was technically correct, the best kind of correct. Zelretch quietly wiped his face with a piece cloth he pulled from wherever he stored things. Explain properly, he said evenly. Fine. I shrugged. It wasn't like I was just going to leave it there. The world I was born in, the original demons are all dead. The term Satan is used similarly as president or prime minister. There are 4 Satans, of which my biological father is one of. I'm actually descended primarily through the Baal and Gremory lines of Solomon's 72 pillars. I don't know how to handle this, Rin said flatly. If it makes you feel better, modern-day devils aren't much different than humans. They don't go around stealing souls or anything. Well, mostly, I'd rather not get into the whole mess with evil pieces. But they're honestly better than their demon ancestors. I'll freak out over this later then. Rin snorted. I'm pretty sure the church would go ballistic if they found out. Yeah, probably not a good idea to mention outside. The church does have a few monsters I would rather not tangle with right now. It would probably be worse than the world lines that the old man is a dead apostle. Wait, what? Rin blinked in confusion again. Not relevant right now. Zelretch cut me off. I believe we are getting sidetracked. Well, there isn't much more to my story. That was basically a month ago, and I found myself in a world I didn't recognize, but I was able to gather some resources and figure some things out. Curious. Zelretch looked thoughtful. I had some preliminary thoughts about such a phenomenon, but I had yet to truly put any effort into researching it as a plausible avenue. Why were you even looking into that? Rin asked. That's a good question I hadn't thought about yet. I was more concerned on the how and hadn't even touched the why yet. Nice job, Rin, you really are perceptive. Zelretch stood up, moving towards a shelf in the corner, looking through a few books. The spider, he said simply. My eyes widened. I hesitated ever so slightly. That answer caught me completely off guard. I thought it through, and a realization dawned on me. Was I supposed to be some kind of weapon then? I balled my fists, gritting the words out, but there was an obvious amount of venom present. Watch your tone, he said stoically, staring down at me. I stood up, matching his gaze. Is that why you decided to finally take in a student? Is she another bullet in the chamber? Why did I have no memories of why I took Rin in as a student in my past life, unless it was intentional? I do not make disposable pawns. His words were direct and cut straight through all my rampant thoughts. Fuck. I knew that, I knew it. Why am I acting like this? Jumping to conclusions is not something I do. It was just my old insecurities acting up. Zelretch was many things, a liar was not one of them. I calmed myself down. Let's hear everything out first. No need to just make assumptions with missing knowledge. I would like an explanation. Rin interjected, clearly unsure of what we were talking about. Have you not told her about the spider yet? I questioned him only for Zelretch to look slightly unsure. It was surprising to see that look, if only for a moment. I have not. I did not wish to burden her with something like that before she was strong enough. Yeah, he did care about Rin. I was jumping to conclusions here. I let out a breath I was holding in and fell back into my chair. The spider, also known as the ultimate one of Mercury, or just type Mercury, it exists in the same realm as the Crimson Moon. The strongest creature born from the planet it originates from. An Aristoteles? Rin whispered. What does that have to do with anything? Is it going to awaken soon? Artoria spoke for the first time in a while. You would have information on it based on the Grail systems. I muttered. Yes, it should be awakening by the end of next century if nothing interferes. There's an Aristoteles on Earth. Rin stood up, slamming her hands on the desk. Why did no one tell me about this? It's not widely spread. Zelretch spoke up. It was better to keep any foolish enough to approach it from getting ideas. I stood up again, and started pacing around the room. I usually do my best thinking on my feet. Is the Beast of Gaia active, and what about the White Princess? Arcuate is sleeping, and the beast is sealed for the moment. Zelretch responded. The Beast of Gaia, the White Wolf. One of the planet's creations meant to destroy humanity. It had absolutely authority over human life, primate murder. It being sealed for now was good, a variable like that would be able to flip any boards we set up. Arcuade Brunestad was another. The White Princess, the last true ancestor and the only thing on the planet that could claim the title of Archetype Earth, or the ultimate one of the Earth. When fully awakened with her power, she was something on the same level as the spider. It was basically a creation of the Crimson Moon, Type Moon, as a means to reincarnate onto Gaia without interference from the planet. Didn't work out in the end, but we got another powerful entity that could flip the board. How bad is the situation? I finally asked. All my simulations have either failed or resulted in a Pyrrhic victory. Zelretch admitted with no small amount of concern flashing across his face. Can someone please tell me what's going on? Rin sighed. I feel like everyone is talking around me. I looked at her and then to Zelretch, who gave a small nod. It started when the Age of Gods began to decline. The planet foresaw that humanity would kill it in the far future, eventually living on its dead husk. It sought out the only other figure that could judge it, another celestial body, and the moon answered. That's where the story ends for most people, as they all know the tale of Zelretch defeating the Crimson Moon. What most don't know about is a prophecy into the far future, where on its last breath, Gaia calls to the other celestial bodies to purge humanity from its corpse. Type Mercury received the call thousands of years too early and crashed in the rainforests of South America, where it now slumbers. All data gathered so far indicates that the spider will awaken within the next 100 years or so. I've run countless simulations, creating new variables, and planning new strategies. But it seems like everything I have done so far only manages to trade the whole of humanity for its destruction in the best-case scenario. Zelretch finished. Which is where I apparently come in. I sighed, rubbing my temples. You're a reincarnation of Zelretch. Rin replied quietly. It makes sense now. Zelretch smiled. Indeed. He looked over to me. I had a thought a few years ago, about a me that wasn't bound to the same rules as I was. Rules. That was it, that was what I was missing, so obvious. Zelretch is the Kaleidoscope, he has a certain authority that comes with that, things I couldn't do while he still exists. He can choose certain possibilities and force them to come true, that is one of his greatest treasures. A timeline he views will become the true one among the infinite possibilities. That's why he has to simulate, instead of simply watching. I'm not bound by the same rules, I lack your authority, but I can do things you can't. I shared a look with him, he apparently already thought this out. No wonder. I whispered. It's more than that, you aren't me, he smiled, almost grandfatherly. I'm not you. I repeated, not quite sure how to feel after hearing that. What are we but our experiences? You have my memories but haven't lived through it, you are you and I am me. He said gently. You will therefore think differently, do things I didn't and thus come to different conclusions. I am not Kistur Zelretch Schweinorg. I am just me. And I was okay with that. I guess it's too late to ask you for some training. I snorted in laughter. He smiled but shook his head. It would be best for you to develop without my input. Yeah, I already realized that, well fuck, I'm back to square one, but now the damn spider is hanging over my head. I guess that's why my memories end around here. How many other variables have you tried to introduce? I doubt I was the only thing he tried so far. Hell, I can only imagine he threw everything at the wall and hoped something stuck. Too many to count. He rubbed his eyes, looking much more tired than normal. I've wasted many resources with almost nothing to show for it. If you are here now though, that means something worked, and how knows, maybe others may also come to fruition at some point. Rin was probably one of the easiest variables to introduce, a well-trained apprentice adept at the Kaleidoscope would be invaluable. No wonder he had her sit in on this discussion, it was better for everyone to be on the same page. He truly does not do things for no reason. Even Artoria being here, no doubt he meddled with the Grail war somehow, her noble phantasm would be invaluable in the future. A sudden realization hit me. The Holy Grail. Rin and Artoria both stared at me abruptly. That's why you helped create it initially, allowed for its creation and why it persisted until now. No wonder that was another hole in my memories. Good. He nodded his head. It is as you say, I had to suffer that infernal contraption because it allowed us some minuscule success against the spider in some simulations. It was unlikely the counter-force would put any showing against the spider if this world wasn't worth saving, it was just removing its direct interference and allow this branch to be cut from the tree. Being able to summon heroic spirits, servants, would be invaluable in the inevitable fight. What about the strategies from other world lines? There are plenty that managed to survive past the spider's awakening. He shook his head. This world line is, not unique but different than most. While either Gaia or Alea are usually favored, this one is almost even, just barely in Alea's favor. Most other strategies do not work because of this. You made sure this was the world line I popped into, didn't you? I stopped in my tracks, and turned towards him. His lips curled up into a smirk. Well done. Since when have you been aware of me? He said he hadn't even began to experiment with whatever allowed me to exist, so when did he notice me? The first time you used the Kaleidoscope. He didn't hide the truth. So, you know where to look for your future experiments then. I just nodded. I wasn't exactly upset, he was acting exactly as I would after all. It was a good world, the reincarnation cycle was much easier to meddle with since things like sacred gears were being reborn alongside human souls. I was willing to bet that was the system he piggybacked on to do this initially. Well, I guess you wouldn't mind supporting me with resources? What kind of grandfather would I be if I didn't give my little grandson some pocket change? He raised an eyebrow, and we shared a small laugh. Well, shit, now I need to find someone else to teach me. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.